Good afternoon. My name is Leif Johan Sævland, and I would like to welcome you on behalf of the partners, which is the Norwegian Solar Energy Cluster and the ONS Foundation. I would like to say welcome to a very interesting hour or so with great discussions, insightful panel, where we are going to discuss the future of the energy mix and the likely role of the solar energy in a globally context. The ongoing energy transition will for sure make renewable energy sources as a more important part of the energy mix around in a global context. Solar will for sure be very important, and we are glad to be able to focus on that this afternoon. I'm also very happy to have Moræus Hanssen to guide us throughout the interesting discussions we're going to have. We truly appreciate the participation on an excellent panel and moderator like you, Maria. So I would like to leave the stage, or if I may say the screen, to you, and to say thank you to the panel, thank you to you, Maria, and to all the listeners, and please go and have a great discussion.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be able to lead this and moderate this discussion today. And what we are then going to discuss is that we're going to discuss the future of the energy mix, and more specifically, the role of solar energy in this mix. And I'm honored to have a great panel with me. And let me just shortly introduce the panelists. So we have Laszlo Varro, who is the chief economist from IEA. We have Jenny Chase, who's the head of solar research in Bloomberg New Energy. We have Olav Kolbeinstveit, the VP of Power and Markets from Equinor. Heikki Siniharju, who is the head of solar technology in Fortum. And last but not least, Claus Wattendrup from VP Solar and Batteries from Vattenfall. And the way we plan to conduct this today is that we will give each of the panelists 3 to 4 minutes to share their thoughts and their perspective, their company's perspective on the energy mix, and then what they are trying to do on the solar side, or their views on solar. And then we will try as well as we can to have a lively panel discussion, bearing in mind that we are in a digital setting and we are very COVID compliant today. So we will try to see if we can get some real discussion. So without any further ado, I will invite Laszlo Varro, the chief economist of the International Energy Agency, IEA, to start. And he's then leading the Economic and Investment Office within IEA, which has the aim of providing sound and consistent energy economics and methodological support to the agency, but today also to us. So the screen is yours, Laszlo.
Thank you very much, Diego. First of all, there's no doubt that solar is the greatest success story of the energy system of the decade. The last decade witnessed a radical decline of solar costs, a massive scale increase in deployment, and also we have also seen not only the energy and emission implications, but also the human development implications as well. Perhaps the most uplifting success of the decade is that the number of people who got their first electricity and moved from the Middle Ages and crippling poverty to a modern 21st century economy, that increased from around 30 million per year to 80 million per year. So now we have a much more rapid progress of electrifying both India, Africa, Bangladesh, Indonesia, and solar played an absolutely unique role in accelerating this success. Now, I think the success of solar also has some important implications for the nature of energy implication. Because let's not forget that Albert Einstein got his Nobel Prize in 1922 for the photoelectric effect. Then the first functioning solar panels emerged on space satellites in the 1960s. So this fantastic success of solar, this did not come out of nowhere. This came after decades of scientific progress and decades of patient innovation and early deployment. This is important to keep in mind that we still have a very large innovation gap ahead of us for achieving a zero carbon energy system. So patient ongoing work for innovation is still essential. Now, we also think that the energy system is very strongly determined by government policies. Whenever you discuss the future of the energy system, you always have to make policy assumptions. So we are clear and transparent about those policy assumptions. And I think that even under the current policy environment, solar will go rapidly. And even under the current policy environment, solar will be the largest incremental source of power generation globally. But when you also ask the question that if we implement much stronger climate policies, if we want to put the world economy decisively on a well below 2 degrees trajectory, which technologies we can put our faith on? Solar is again emerging as one of the technologies that can run very, very hard. There are a couple of important challenges to overcome even after the recent decline of solar costs. One is contracting and financing. Now, we still see very big differences. Countries with similar solar endowments can have very different levels of solar deployment depending on how investment friendly the policy framework is in the given country. A large solar project requires several hundred hectares of land. The acquisition of that land is a major political issue in countries. And last but not least, the large majority of solar deployment is grid connected. So we need timely investment in the electricity network, and we also need power systems unlocking sufficient flexibility to deal with the variability of solar. Now, these challenges are not insurmountable. We have everything what it takes to tackle them, but it requires a careful work from governments, regulators, and the industry to actually overcome it.
So thanks a lot, Laszlo. And just, you know, I could easily jump into questions. I'll try to keep it short. Could you say something about investment in grids and the challenges that the big solar projects actually put on the grid system, and where you see the movements here?
Yes, so solar has two phases with respect to grid development. One is that the large utility scale solar projects, which represent the majority of global solar deployment, and they are the cheapest electricity ever produced. Now, those large projects are essentially power plants. They just use a different technology. So they need a robust transmission network. And very often the best solar potential is in places like Arizona, the Sonora Desert in northern Mexico, Morocco, where you need long distance transmission. The only country which is on track to actually build that appropriate long distance transmission is China, which has large-scale solar deployment in Gansu and Qinghai provinces, and it's building direct current transmission to integrate that. But this will be needed from Arizona to Los Angeles. This will be needed from northern Mexico towards Mexico City, and so on. And then the residential rooftop solar projects, which is from the point of view of energy quantities, is the minority of solar deployment, but it's very important to engage society and engage citizens in the energy transition. Now, those solar projects very often require the reinforcement of the distribution network, and also to make the distribution network smarter and more flexible. The distribution network was designed for top-down energy flows from large centralized power plants. It was not designed for citizens producing electricity on their rooftop and feeding back to the power system. So we will need investment at the high end of the network in long distance transmission. We will need investment at the low end of the network in reinforcing distribution systems. And let's not forget that over 10% of total electricity network investment is IT. So we will need significant investments in making those networks smarter.
Maybe just as a follow-up and somewhere in the discussion, we should also discuss the place of solar on those not connected to the grid, because we still want to address the energy poverty, and everyone is looking to solar for those not grid connected. But are we going to see a real sort of growth in that, and do we see any real sort of contribution for solar to address solar poverty, and maybe especially for those not connected? But let's bear that in mind and see if we can come back to that. And then I will pass on to Jenny Chase. So Jenny is working as a manager for Bloomberg New Energy Finance, and is leading the Global Insight Service. And she's been working in the Bloomberg New Energy Finance for quite some time. And she and her team is responsible for producing the data and analysis on global solar industry. And now we are, of course, eager to hear what you are predicting from the years ahead. The screen is yours, Jenny.
Thank you, Maria, and thank you, Laszlo. I honestly never thought we'd see the day when the IEA said solar was king. I started this job in 2005. And I took this job to found a solar team, thinking that maybe solar would one day be 1% of the global electricity mix. You know, we can hope. And yeah, we're at about 3% already, and plenty of countries are coming on strong. So I feel like these days, when we forecast big volumes of solar, people don't think we're mad anymore, which is good. Like, if in 2006, as a completely new analyst, I'd given you a completely accurate forecast of global solar deployment, I would not have a job now. People would have just been like, silly girl, go away. That said, we're not going to build infinite amounts of solar. So we're much more focused on the short term than Laszlo's team. We haven't seen a big impact of coronavirus, actually, except in a couple of cases like India. There has been an impact on other developing markets, but those are so small, they don't really affect the global numbers that much. And we also see the net zero targets that countries are putting in, making the countries set out policy for solar for the next few years, because solar is a really easy part of net zero targets. You know, there's all kinds of tough stuff when you're trying to get your economy to net zero, like how do you get the last 10% of electrification? How do you decarbonize agriculture? Transport's quite easy, you just electrify, but aviation, shipping, heating, those are really hard. Solar's easy, and we see countries just put their foot on the accelerator. And so when we did a model of an economic transition, we had 200 gigawatts a year of solar installed sometime in the 2030s for the first time. And we now think it's quite likely to be 2022. So that's fun. I think, like the IEA, we think grids are a challenge, probably massive. I think we expect a bit more distributed solar than the IEA does. Ours is about 1/3 rooftop solar. And one of the reasons is that we pretty much think that people are just going to slap solar on every roof where it makes sense, particularly when they're putting the roof up, because scaffolding is a massive component these days. So why would you build a roof without solar? Even here in well, you're in Norway, it's even worse, but here in Switzerland, it's not great. So we have about 1/3 rooftop to 2/3 utility scale to 2050, but we're running well ahead of our economic transition 2050 forecasts. BloombergNEF is actually less enthusiastic about solar than the IEA at the moment. We actually think wind is king. And the main reason for that is that in the economies that use a lot of electricity, wind blows at better times. The big challenge for solar is that when you have a very seasonal climate, which all of us in Northern Europe have, the demand is very badly matched to supply. But generally speaking, we're probably underestimating the impact solar will have further south in places that have less seasonality. But we do think that Europe probably will stick with the wind mostly. And also, we already see enormous amounts of batteries coming in, especially in places like the US and China, to take the stress off the grid. So sometimes batteries can remove the need for some grid investment. They are their own investment, but we do see batteries running well ahead of where we expected. So the future is really exciting, but it is really cheap. Solar is so cheap these days that it's very hard to make money. As any solar developer that's bidding in an auction will have noticed, they can squeeze the manufacturers for every cent per watt, every fraction of a cent per watt. But even once you've done that, to put a bid into the auction, that has a chance of winning, you probably also have to squeeze your financing costs, your engineering costs, your development costs, until sometimes, like sitting here in my office in Switzerland, I do wonder how any of you expect to make money, but companies do. And there's certainly opportunity here. And that's probably about all I have to say.
Thank you, Jenny. I did listen in on your presentation earlier today, and I did notice that comment you made about, this is an industry where it may very well be very difficult to make money. And I also happened to listen to an interview with the Chief Technology Officer of Iberdrola. I think his name was Delgado. And he said that he believed that just in Spain, there were 100 gigawatts in the pipeline of big solar development parks. So could you just say something about, how do you believe that this market is going to manage to regulate itself? Are we going to see significant losses of money for those that come too late to the market? Or do you think that we will be well enough understanding the market to back off if we come too late into the game?
Well, the 100 gigawatts of solar in the pipeline in Spain shouldn't concern us too much, because it is a sort of gambling situation. Not a lot of money has been spent on that 100 gigawatts. They have really just filed, what they're after is the land and the grid connection. So this is, a lot of paperwork has been filed, and most developers, a developer might have filed on 20 sites, and if they eventually get the permits to build on one of them, they will make money potentially. So that 100 gigawatts is highly speculative, and it's unlikely it will all be built. That said, some of them may not make money, particularly if they do end up building 50 gigawatts in Spain, which will of course all generate at very much the same time when it's sunny. And that's why I think a lot of developers are pinning their hopes on a hydrogen future, which would create a huge demand for electricity that had some potential to be moved around in terms of the day and even the year, and would ensure actual demand for electricity. At the moment, though, we just don't know. Developers have made huge amounts of money by getting permits in the past, and so of course they're still trying to do it, and some will make money. I think in manufacturing, it's difficult to assume that there's even a first mover advantage. I mean, a lot of the big manufacturers 10 years ago, in fact, probably most of them are now gone. They're bankrupt, some of them several times. So manufacturing and development are different. And development, there is a first mover advantage. Manufacturing, there is not. But sorry to be really unhelpful. Some companies will make money and some won't.
But you mentioned hydrogen, and I'm sure we will come back to hydrogen later in the discussion. So let's move on to Equinor. Olav Kolbeinstveit, he's the VP of Power and Markets in Equinor. And the companies have made some move into solar, we will be interested to hear what you have as ambition on the renewable side, and then especially on the solar energy side. The screen is yours, Olav.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you for the nice introduction. The energy transition and what we're discussing today is really something we've never seen before. The growth of renewables and solar is really unprecedented. It makes it fantastically interesting to work in Equinor in such a setting and within the energy space. And hence I really enjoyed the discussion listening in so far and the discussion we're going to have. I start by explaining a bit how we approach this in Equinor. I'll give a flavor, as you said, Maria, on our approach to onshore renewables and solar in particular. And I thought I could reflect a bit on how we or Equinor as a big energy company can contribute into the transition in the best possible way. In the past, we were called Statoil. Now we're called Equinor, and we define ourselves as a broad energy company. And we are transforming our business in parallel with the energy transition. And this is really a huge task for Equinor and the industry and the society. And remember, here we discussed electricity, but it's only 80%. Or 80% of the energy is actually consumed by fossil fuels today. So it's what we're discussing here is just a small part. And electricity is around 20% of global end consumption today. So we have to electrify massively. We have to make the electricity green, and we will have to decarbonize the sectors that are hard to abate, as Jenny was into. And we would like to be part of that, all that. We wish to be ahead of the curve. We have a vision of shaping the future of energy, and we will be a leading company in the energy transition. And we do that through three pillars. It's by focusing our oil and gas business, it's by accelerating the renewables, and it's by developing low carbon technologies like CCS and hydrogen that has been mentioned already. And of course, we bring our legacy competence from offshore oil and gas into this transition. That's why we have developed into becoming one of the leading offshore wind players globally, delivering large bottom fixed as well as bringing down cost on floating wind. And we're also taking a leading role in low carbon technologies like CCS as well as hydrogen. But being a broad energy company means to us that we also take part in the technologies that stands for the large share of the growth, like solar. I think it was 50% of the growth last year or this year, so it's massive. And by accelerating renewables, we're not only being exposed to renewables, we're being exposed to the power market. And power markets, they are instant and local and very different from what we're used to in the oil and gas side. And we believe that we are competitive when we can deepen in one market, playing on our energy competence, as well as our trading capabilities, delivering on what the market and the energy system needs, as has been mentioned by the speaker so far. And this is how we will like to develop to become a market-driven power producer. And by entering solar, onshore wind and batteries, combined with trading, and marketing, we are diversifying our portfolio. We get exposure to the cheapest technologies. We ensure that we have capex flexibility in our portfolio and shorter investment cycles than what we're used to. And we prepare for liberalized and mature electricity markets in a fairly low risk way. We will concentrate on a few markets to learn and to develop concepts that we think will work. That's why we have invested in Scatec, which has been great so far. It's a 300% return on that investment in 2 years. So that's how we make money, Jenny. We have partnerships with them in Brazil and Argentina, developing solar projects. We're working on entering a few other markets that fit our belief on where we can play a difference, and where we then could deepen. And these markets that we are looking for is markets where we have still relatively low renewable penetration, and there's an emerging liberalization giving us opportunities to trade our electricity. In addition, we work on storage projects that can support both the onshore activities on solar as well as the offshore wind activities. But because the cannibalization and all that, it's not only the solar that struggles with that, it's also the wind. And then we do venture investments within a large base of renewables, among others, micropower, which is an off-grid player combining solar and batteries. And finally, we do quite some research and on several technologies, among others, the floating solar segment. By entering solar and onshore, including the batteries, we believe that we deliver what the system needs. And by delivering what the system needs, I think we can contribute to delivering on the dilemma of energy deliveries, which is finding the right balance between sustainable, affordable, and reliable energy deliveries. And I think that's where we, as a big, broad energy company, really can play a difference in the transition. Solar is really important. It's the cheapest technology, and there's an abundance of sun a lot of places. Not where I'm located in Stavanger, but plenty of other places. But we need a system to work, and that is something that the solar cannot fix alone. And that's why we approach this as a market-driven, integrated, multi-tech approach to this. So that's that was my intro, Maria.
Thanks a lot, Olav. There's so many questions that you can, things that you can address when just listening to you now. Let me just follow up with something here, and which I also hope that we can return to during the discussion. So you mentioned markets. A lot of this is rather specific. I mean, so we talked about the grid and the grid connectivity. You find, I mean, enormous differences between the electricity market globally. To what extent do you believe, you need to focus on some markets to understand them and be able to make money there? And to what extent can you just take your technology and knowledge and try to be global? How much is local knowledge versus the global technology or the technology angle here?
I think you can choose to have two approaches. You could be an early mover into immature markets and spread yourself, deploying your technology and your kind of project know-how into the markets. But if you're going to build scale in a market, if you're going to stay and build a portfolio, I think you really need to have deep knowledge about the market design, about the regulation, and be able to understand the dynamics of the market. And it's actually one of the things that we are thinking of is that we have invested in Danske Commodities, which is a big trading house in Aarhus in Denmark. And to utilize that, we need a portfolio within a market, and then we need that kind of deep understanding in that market, and hopefully approaching it, or not hopefully, but then we would like to approach it with a multi-tech approach, meaning that we are not exposed to one single tech that deliver only electricity at one point in time. So by having solar, wind, a battery, and we can mix it also with gas to power positions where that is relevant for us. And by that, we have a diversified portfolio. We understand what the market needs, and we provide a value-add product to the markets that we choose to enter.
So, and then another follow-up question, which is, so we have seen Equinor taking their very strong offshore competence and applied it to offshore wind. Clearly, so you have the stationary wind, but you also have the floating wind aspect. Have it been in your thoughts to think similarly around floating solar?
Yeah, we're looking into floating solar, and we're doing piloting with SINTEF in Trondheim and Moss Maritime. So we have actually a megawatt that we plan to bring on sea next year, and we're looking into it. It's still in its infancy, so it's not kind of providing the scale that we need today, but it's definitely something that where we have an edge, where we can deploy the maritime technology and the know-how that we have within the company, and I believe it's a segment within solar that can really grow, because that's been part of the discussion so far. This solar and onshore is really a property game, and in dense areas, property is the scarce resource, and then moving solar offshore might be a good way of coming around that issue. So we're looking into it, and we're curious, but it needs to fit into our overall portfolio.
So thank you, Olav. I'm sure we may try to come back to floating solar later during the discussion. So let's move on to Heikki and Fortum. So Heikki Siniharju is the global head of solar technology in Fortum. And you have been working in the renewable space for a long time in renewable business, project development, engineering and technology. And have the position as global head of solar technology. So we are very much looking forward to hearing about Fortum's ambitions and activities within solar and how you believe that these activities fit into the energy future.
Sure, thank you, Maria, and first of all, thank you for inviting me. So it's great to be here with a great set of industry colleagues in this panel. So yeah, my name is Heikki Siniharju. I'm heading the solar technology team in Fortum, which is basically the company's center of excellence for solar. Fortum then is a European energy company with activities around 40 countries and 19,000 experts worldwide. It's currently the third largest CO2-free power generator in Europe. Still, of course, the lion's share coming from the power is from hydro as well as and then from nuclear. However, of course, solar has been, the company has had an exciting history with solar, but the renaissance of solar really started 10 years ago in Fortum when we once again started looking into the solar opportunities and business cases. And today we have around 600 megawatt of operational fleet, as well as then 350 megawatts under construction in India and in Russia, where the current utility scale focus has been. However, as we have been now stating last week, so we are as well growing our ambitions to grow in large scale solar, yes, also in selected European markets. And basically, we have said that during the next 5 years, so we will be putting 60% of the company's growth capex to solar and wind, which makes about 2 billion euros. Where we are active, so is that we do the whole project value chain. So we are there active in the development, as well as then construction, design, as well as then in asset management and operations. In addition to utility scale projects, so we have been working in the B2B and B2C sector as well in Scandinavia. So we have installed about 1,600 B2B, B2C systems up to date. And but to be frank, so the clear focus will be in the utility scale projects in the solar spectrum. Then I would say that what we will be kind of doing then in the future is that we will be integrating it with the cool things like batteries, for sure, with the electrolyzers for the hydrogen, and then of course when the opportunities depending on the market, so do as well a mix with the wind. From the company point of view itself, so of course we have a big kind of presence in gas industry, and there with our group company Uniper, so we have been one of the front runners in the hydrogen economy, and of course that is something that what I'm really much looking forward to integrating solar with the green hydrogen, and I see it as a really a big thing in the future. Maybe just very shortly, we will come to many different questions, but maybe for the Jenny's point, so I would say that wind and solar, they are buddies for sure. I would say another way around that solar will be the king of the game in the power sector, as well as a very much more stronger king than what people believe today on a general terms. And then in the future and a little bit longer term, the best buddies of all, I feel, will be solar PV plus hydrogen, kind of facilitating this decarbonization in a big way do we then discuss it about industry transformation or traffic? But that's maybe in a nutshell what Fortum is looking at the solar spectrum and what it is as a company.
So thank you, Heikki. Sorry. So could you? If I understood it now, I mean, so you haven't really sort of moved heavily into the utility scale on the solar yet, but you mentioned India and Russia. Could you say something about your rationale, for being there these days?
Sure, of course. Well, I would say that, of course, 600 megawatts is not it's not super much when we are nowadays discussing about gigawatts and gigawatts, but of course it's a good start, and of course that we will need to leverage up in the coming years, and we will do that. India and Russia, so they come from. We have been looking into the global markets quite holistically in the past, but at the end of the day, we have been going quite synergistically to a new markets. So in India, it's of course one of the top 3 markets globally in solar, so it's a great place to be. We went there already 8 years ago, and then we were looking at the other business opportunities like hydro, combined heat and power at that time. But then the solar was basically the fastest growing and is currently the strongest leg of our businesses in India. In Russia, of course, we have been having a strong presence in Russia for a long time now, and there, of course, the solar and wind are something that are coming, and then what we are kind of looking forward to do is shifting for our investments from these fossil fuels towards solar and wind in Russia, and there, of course, due to the strong presence, we have been very successful with the bids in the solar spectrum, as well as, of course, having the biggest fleet in wind in Russia.
And where do you go from here? Where do you expect to see your next plants coming up?
So now, as mentioned, so the focus is shifting quite a bit towards Europe as well. So we have a new group company of Uniper, and then we are starting to do a lot of cooperation. They have hands and legs in several markets in Europe, of course, Germany, UK, Benelux countries, to name a few. So in these markets, we are kind of looking into of growing in Europe with the PV in the next 5 years, and then looking at the additional interesting markets in a European scale, and then we will see. There are, of course, doors open for organic growth, and then as well inorganic growth.
Okay, let's come back to a couple of these issues afterwards. Then the final panelist, Claus Wattendrup, head of solar in Vattenfall, and you have held your position since 2017, I understand. And let's hear now where Vattenfall is taking their solar area and what you see as the potential. And we even have a presentation here. So the screen is yours, Claus.
Sure. Thanks for the invitation. Good to be here. Vattenfall Renewables. This is what I tell you about in a few minutes. My name is Claus. I'm heading the business unit Solar and Batteries. And you see in front of you our biggest hybrid park in construction, which is 38 megawatts of solar, 21 of onshore, and a 12 megawatt of a battery. It is finished in January. And Vattenfall, you might know this, is a Swedish state-owned company and one of Europe's largest producer of heat and electricity. In power, I think we are almost, we are coming to a CO2-free development. We have sold all of our lignite and most of our coal plants. We have some hydro and nuclear, and the future growth is primarily in renewables. We are Northern European, so our core countries are Sweden, Denmark, Germany, Netherlands, and UK. And this year's what we are growing in. This is wind and solar. We have 3 gigawatts in operation. mainly wind. We have started in wind and later picked on in solar. We have more than 3 gigawatts in construction at the moment. We have 6 gigawatts in development in wind and more than 2 in solar in all our countries. So we stick to our countries. We don't go to Spain or Africa or North America. Yes, it's a strong growth, and this is really exciting. We are number 2, I would say, in offshore. In solar, much smaller. And I'm heading a pipeline of large-scale assets, mostly in Germany and Netherlands. So a couple of sites, a couple of 100 megawatts, really big sites. The market is changing, and I'm much more bullish than you are, Jenny, to be honest. So there is really an astonishing development. I've worked in offshore before, and I was surprised by the price decline in offshore. But yeah, solar is even stronger, and it will be the winner in the end. But we need all of it. It will also come to Scandinavia. If I look at value factors in Sweden are higher for solar than for wind. So not in northern Sweden, maybe, yeah. But this is coming. It will take some years, but also prices are really low. The big farms I do now in Germany at the moment are really like at 3 cents or so a kilowatt hour. So really like cheap electricity. And that is only going down, down, down. Yes, so, but also I don't want to have this antagonism of wind and solar. We need both. We need hundreds of gigawatts in Europe in the next 20 years, and we will do this, and it will come. And therefore, I'm very excited to do this. My last slide is just our purpose. This is what Vattenfall is aiming for: fossil-free within 1 generation. Thank you.
Thank you, Claus. So you said that you were sticking to the known geographies, at least so far. So in this, I mean, so if you just take Scandinavia now, you know, the large utility sort of scale project versus decentralized distributed versus maybe even private rooftops. How do you actually see those 3 markets moving, and where do you want to place yourself?
Yeah, so far in Scandinavia, it has been wind for sure, right? Onshore wind, and it will continue. We do everything, right? We do large ground-mounted solar. We do rooftop solar. We build roughly 2,000 or 3,000 household solar installations per year. But this is honestly mainly in Netherlands and Germany, and not so much in Scandinavia, but it's starting. Volume-wise, for us, the gigawatts are in the large ground-mounted assets. And it's also much cheaper, right? So the household installation is price times 3 or so of the price. So again, we need all. We need small rooftop behind the meter everywhere we can, and we need large ground-mounted solar. We need large offshore. We need it all to cover the enormous demand, because I see demand increasing also in Scandinavia. And I mean, we are phasing out a nuclear block next year as Vattenfall. Demand is increasing. So in the end, we thought about Scandinavia as having an oversupply in the past. This is also changing, let's say in 10 years. So the market is changing, and renewables will play a dominant role there.
Okay, thank you. So let's try to see if we can have a bit of a discussion. You probably should raise your hand, or you just take the word here. Could we start by maybe discussing solar PV and hydrogen? To what extent do you see these things going hand in hand? Is hydrogen coming because we have too much energy around? You know, will that be the sort of natural partnership, or do you see solar and batteries being a more natural sort of partnership starting from the beginning? So maybe should we start where we started the panelists? If I ask you first, Laszlo?
Yes, so I think hydrogen is definitely coming and is definitely going to play an important role. But I think the notion that we will use the so-called excess renewable production for hydrogen production, I think is completely false. And the reason for this is that if you have a properly integrated European electricity market, if you do our homework on expanding interconnectivity, making demand more flexible, using electric cars in an optimal fashion, and so on, different models suggest different numbers, but we are talking about somewhere between 30 to 50 terawatt hours of genuinely excess renewable electricity, which will have to be curtailed. Now, when you run the numbers of how much electricity you would need for the industrial applications of hydrogen, for the synthetic fuel applications of hydrogen, and so on, now there we are talking about several hundred, but even thousands of terawatt hours. So if we do a properly managed power system, the amount of excess renewables that you have is orders of magnitude smaller. Moreover, if you build an electrolyzer which you operate only at noon when the sun is shining at the brightest, that's going to be an awfully expensive hydrogen. So our view is that renewable energy-based hydrogen is certainly going to take off big time, but for that you need a place where you can have almost like baseload renewables, 4,000 or 5,000 hours of renewables, either a good offshore wind site or a place like northern Mexico or Australia or Morocco, which is windy and sunny at the same time, and then you combine wind and solar, and you run your electrolyzers at a 4,000 or 5,000 hours load factor, and you have the volumes of energy, and you have the high utilization rate to bring the cost of hydrogen down. This is our vision of how it should happen.
Sorry, I was on mute. So that's a good sort of starting point, and thank you for sharing your thoughts. One of the questions that I have is that, going forward, are we going to see a hydrogen value chain where the aim is to generate electricity again, or are we going to see a hydrogen value chain where the aim is to actually provide hydrogen into industrial processes where we don't need to go the other way back? I think you sort of answered according to your perspective, Laszlo, but I'm also interested to hear what the other things on this matter. So Jenny, I will let you go second.
Thank you. I would second what Laszlo said about electrolyzers are expensive. You don't want to build an electrolyzer and then run it like 20% capacity factor. That doesn't make any sense. What you might do, I think it was Olav who said solar is a property game, and I might steal that. What you might do is find a place that has good resources but no grid connection, where land is really cheap, and build basically a hydrogen production complex with solar, with wind, and probably with some batteries, and get that to like 60, 70, 100% load factor. And then you would use hydrogen to, first of all, to make steel, to make ammonia, to replace the hydrogen we currently use that's made of fossil fuels. I think hydrogen going back to power, we're less enthusiastic about. I think, to be honest, it's being added into a lot of models just to make the numbers stack up towards the end. But yes, it could go either way, and I've had the feeling there's a bit too much hype about hydrogen at the moment, but there are some big government-led plans.
Okay, so then we let Olav go.
Thank you, Maria. And I have to echo Laszlo and Jenny here when it comes to solar and hydrogen. I think to unlock it, we need a scale, we need high load factors, and we need to think integrated to ensure that we build a market for it. It's not basically enough to find a hotspot somewhere and produce the hydrogen. You need actually the sectors that will be able to consume it. And I think in the beginning, to unlock it, I think we need to think integrated. And yeah, Maria, you have great experience from the NCS. I'm thinking a bit like when we developed the gas market in Europe. When we developed the Troll field on the NCS, we needed customers to be able to lift the pipelines from Norway to Germany, for instance. And then we made great coalitions with E.ON and the other utilities on the continent to be able to lift that. I think we need that type of connection again to be able to lift the hydrogen value chains. And as one of the ideas or thinking behind that, we stepped into the North H2 project a couple of days back together with Shell and Gasunie and RWE to actually be able to lift such a mega project with offshore wind, electrolyzers, and connect it with consumers, and then consumers first and foremost being the hard to abate sectors like large industry and heavy transport.
Okay, thank you, Olav. Heikki, you want to say a few words?
Yeah, sure. Happy to come along, and I fully agree that basically the spearhead solutions are that you are integrating the hydrogen for the industries that are kind of needing it already, and of course then it's something that when we compare that what is the energy need, what we are kind of, for example, in Europe getting from the gas for the heating industry, so it's much bigger portion than electricity. So of course it will be playing in a longer term role, kind of making that natural gas more greener. Maybe a bit nevertheless challenging the status quo here from that point of view, that of course if you are taking the European capexes for the electrolysis, so you will be kind of ending up into this type of thing, that it will never fly if you are having peak load hours at a certain level. But then when you are really starting to look at more globally, where are the electrolyzers cost in other regions, and basically, for example, in China. So Europe need to kind of come to the similar levels. And then if you are going much lower capexes in electrolysis, so then this game start to shift quite a bit. But fully agreeing that it's a kind of a tool to decarbonize industries, traffic, heavy traffic, and those areas where electrification is not the cheapest way to achieve it.
Klaus?
Yes, I fully agree to what all of you before me have said, to be honest. It has to be a combination of wind and solar, and it will not be re-electrified in the beginning. So we have a project, 200 megawatt solar in Netherlands plus 100 megawatt wind, and we put electrolyzer next door because there's a customer next door, and this customer needs it, and then he pays a decent price for it, and we don't have a big transport issue. Then you can make a business case out of it. But if it's early times. I also agree it's a slight hype at the moment. I do believe in it, but it will take some time. But it will come.
So some of you describe it as a bit of an hype, and I think that's it's. I find that the whole energy transition, one of the most challenging things for me have been to understand how fast this is going to happen, and so maybe we could say could we discuss a bit how fast are we going to see real changes? I mean, and that's clearly linked to the fossil industry. And are we now seeing big oil and gas and big utilities moving into renewable because things are going to happen much quicker than during the last 5 years? We can remind ourselves that the Paris Agreement was signed 5 years ago. And the question to the panel is maybe those 5 years, have we been moving fast or disappointingly slow? And is it now that everything is coming? Laszlo, what do you think?
So I think the past 5 years successfully built the foundations, the springboard. In terms of technology, renewables are much cheaper, and also another important thing that we haven't touched upon, that system operators did a very good job improving the flexibility of power systems. Now, if the political perception is that renewables are expensive and endanger energy security, then the energy transition wouldn't be politically feasible. The past 5 years addressed the cost issues, and it addressed the system operation issues. Also, we now have a much broader coalition. Dozens of countries introduced new renewable policies. So it's no longer Germany plus California's hobby. It's really global. The corporate sector really came on board. I used to work in the oil and gas industry, and observing my former industry, I'm very positively impressed by the journey of some large oil and gas companies. By no means all. I'm happy to acknowledge Equinor in the good guys club. So the rest of the industry still has a long way to go, but some major oil and gas companies have really gone forward. But I also have to say that even with the coronavirus crisis, global carbon dioxide emissions this year are over 30 billion tons. So in terms of its fundamental progress, there is an awful lot of hard work still ahead.
Thank you. Jenny, disappointed, or have we managed to do more than expected the last 5 years?
To be honest, Laszlo said it well. It's a spring. We've made a good springboard. It's been slower the last 5 years than it would be, than it could have been. But then you mentioned Paris, and I almost feel the Paris Agreement is irrelevant now. Net zero carbon is where it all is now, and that's a big acceleration from where Paris had us. And I think that's beginning to be seen as feasible. And that's brilliant.
So Equinor, are we going to see you moving a lot faster the next 5 years compared to the 5 years that we have behind us? Is this when big oil and gas is really sort of becoming the renewable champions of the world?
It's almost a bit boring, to just agree with the previous speakers. But the springboard analogy I think was brilliant, and I think Equinor. We became Equinor 4 years ago, defined ourselves as a broad energy company. We've stepped into offshore wind. This autumn we had a CEO transition with Anders Opedal coming in. Very quickly defining that we aim for net zero for 2050, defining a pillar of accelerating renewables, and to me that's a very clear signal that the next 5 years will be faster than the previous 5, and by that it means that it's promising for the future and promising for the energy transition towards net zero.
So Heikki, you can say something about this, or you can say something about batteries, because we get a lot of questions around batteries on the chat.
Okay, sure. Happy to do both. I would say that, of course, big utilities, oil companies. So when you look at the data, so 75% of the investment 2019 globally were wind and solar, and 50% of that was the wind of the power capacity. So of course, we are looking at the data, and if you want to be a respected player in the utility business or in the future as well in the oil business, you need to be kind of joining this game, because it's kind of starting to take over. So you are kind of not a very futuristic company if you are not in, and fully kind of agreeing and maybe putting a little bit more fire on the burner, so to say, so that this will be happening much more faster. So I'm super happy to hear Laszlo saying about what he's saying, because of course in the history it wasn't that positive to read these reports coming, and I would say that still both Bloomberg as well as the IEA, so they are not very opportunistic in their estimates for sure, rather quite conservative even in this sustainable path. So I feel that these things will be happening much faster than any one of us are maybe anticipating, and that's of course a super happy news for the planet and as human beings. Batteries will be, I think we were discussing about the hype. I think always there is a hype when something new comes, and then the real work starts when the hype disappears. I'm a great believer that this hydrogen hype will kind of materialize, but of course it will take some time. With the batteries, I think they were super hype a few years ago, and now of course the price trends what we are seeing over there, they are very interesting, and then of course batteries plus solar as well, so they integrate really nicely, and you are able to make a quite interesting business cases when putting these two together. And that's of course the greatness of solar. It's really flexible. We have discussed here already that you can put it on the rooftop, you can put it next to the industry, you can put it next to the electrolyzer on top of the lake if there is a kind of a land next to it. So I think it's looking really good. One comment, if I may still, so It has been as well discussed about that there is not enough land for these renewables, and that's a scarce source for sure at some places, but we need to put this into perspective. If we would put 40% of the Finnish landscape full of PV, that would electrify the whole globe with the current electricity need. So if you put that into India, so you need half of the space, and if you do it after 10 years because of the panel efficiencies, you will need the half of that space. So I'm not seeing that as such a big issue. What you are always hearing people quoting that there is not enough land. For sure, at some places it will be the case if you are discussing about Netherlands or Central Europe, but then there are plenty of space to put solar on it and cool stuff next to it.
But we still have the not in my backyard discussion, which I think is coming to renewables a lot. So Claus, you get the last word here. So now you can say something about, batteries or not in my backyard or fast or slow.
Fast and slow. So I think looking back the last 5 years, I could have always imagined more. But I mean, for example, we have built 2 gigawatts of renewables. In the next 5 years, we will build 7 or 8, just to show the indication, right? And the good news is that we don't rely on subsidies anymore. This has been the up and down and has been really markets crashing and markets increasing. And this is off the table in now or in a few years in some markets. And this is the game changer, because then it fuels the growth, fuels itself. And this will really be, so your numbers, Jenny, will also double and triple in the next years, I'm pretty sure. So yeah, looking forward to it.
So thank you. So we could have been going on for a long time, but we were allocated an hour. So we need to try to be a bit strong here. So then I'm going to invite, I have an echo here now. I'm going to invite the CEO of the Norwegian Solar Energy Cluster, Trine Kopstad Berentsen, to say the last couple of words on today's panel.
Thank you, Maria.
Oh, you need to mute.
I think you need to mute your speaker. Yeah. I had the pleasure to wrap things up. Thank you so much for that. I would like to say thank you on behalf of the Norwegian Solar Energy Cluster and ONS Foundation. And thank you to the panel for an interesting discussion. There are many opportunities ahead to pursue, and I hope you enjoyed the webinar as much as I did. Tusen takk. Thank you all, and a special thank you to Maria for moderating this discussion. Thank you. Have a great afternoon, everyone.